Hi everyone. This presentation will be about the SS Shenectady fatigue analysis for Lab 7 and ME 354, and this presentation will be done by Sam Smith and Carrie Healy. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the discovery of the crack/failure. The SS Shenectady was a 1943 World War II tanker that cracked right down the middle, and this crack was about 3 feet wide. At the scene, there were bystanders and about 30 crew members who noticed the crack immediately. One bystander said that it even shook the ground around them. It was later reported that the crack of the SS Shenectady could be heard up to a mile away. There were a couple consequences of the crack/failure. So obviously the SS Shenectady was split in half and had to be fixed. And fixing the ship costed lots of money and time. Luckily, though, there was only one person injured during the whole incident. So now I'm going to talk about the crack/failure regarding the investigation and how they identified the problem. So at first, the FBI was called because people suspected some sort of sabotage on the ship, but nothing was found. Later, the U.S. Coast Guard investigated the design and construction of the ship. At the time, the failure was cited as a defective weld because problems regarding fatigue analysis were not really well known at the time. And during their investigation, they calculated the nominal tensile stress in the deck to be about 68 newtons per millimeter squared. So now let's dive into the root cause of the crack/failure. So knowing what we know now, this failure was most likely due to the low-grade steel that was thought to be ductile and underwent brittle fractures, which usually occurs at a low critical temperature. And this makes sense in our case because at the time the SS Shenectady failed, the air temperature was about 10 degrees and the water temperature was 40 degrees. The cracks on the ship most likely propagated from the sharp hatch edges around the ship, where the cracks formed and then moved throughout the low-grade steel. We could also conclude that the inexperienced operators who made the welding defects and discontinuities could have had something to do with the failure because they had not been properly trained before World War II.
The company that constructed the SS Shenectady made multiple changes in order to fix the fatigue failure so that it would not happen again in the future. The first thing they did was reduce the critical temperature of the metal that was used to build the ship. This was done by using higher quality steel that had reduced sulfur and phosphorus impurity contents. This steel was better because it would behave like a ductile material instead of like a brittle material. To prevent crack propagations, the sharp corners on each hatch were also rounded off. Finally, the welding operators were trained properly. The welding practices improved and welding codes were developed so that these mistakes would not be made again. After reducing the critical temperature of the steel, rounding off hatch corners, and improving welding practices, the problem was resolved. The SS Shenectady was repaired when these three changes were made. The tanker was used throughout the duration of World War II with no other issues. Kaiser Shipyards, which built the Shenectady, also built another 500 similar ships throughout the war. None of these ships had any fatigue failures, which indicated that the corrections made to the Shenectady and other ships were sufficient and safe. Although the fixes made on the Shenectady never led to any other failures, additional design improvements could be made so a failure would be even less likely. Thicker beams of steel could be used to reduce the stress concentrations and decrease the likelihood of a crack. The stress could be spread across larger surface areas and with stronger geometries. Additionally, an even higher grade steel could be used to further decrease the probability of a brittle failure occurring. Here are the sources that we use to gather information about the Shenectady. Thank you for listening to this presentation.